Welcome back to the Rebel Podcast. P. Nate, Elder P, Rebels. We are a ministry of the Ezra Institute for Cultural Reformation, and we are the Rebels. Nate, it feels like a long time since we've been together on a podcast, so I'm delighted to be here today. But we are even more delighted that we have Pastor Joel Webbon from Right Response Medias and a pastor in Texas to join us today to discuss Reformed Confessionalism. We are delighted to have you, Joel.
Thanks for having me.
We're in the middle of a series here called How to Win the World. And we jokingly, Joel, we said that we were going to call this episode How to Win the World with Primary Water. And just see what ends up happening. But instead, we're going to talk to you a little bit about Reformed Confessionalism. I actually have a confession to start with. We got the idea for this podcast series actually being down at the Right Response conference in Texas. When you held that conference, it was called Christendom 2.0, Blueprints to Christendom 2.0, and it was 7 doctrines to rule the world. And it kind of sparked our interest in talking about a few things, slightly more practical in terms of practices rather than doctrines. But we loved your talk down in Texas, and we thought that our listeners could benefit from the idea of essentially not being so egotistical, arrogant as to assume that we have found something new. And I think there's a lot of evangelicals in North America who are always chasing after the new thing. And what we really appreciate about your talk at the conference was essentially the call to redig the wells of Abraham, to go back and attach ourselves to the historic and Reformed faith. So why don't we just start off by when you put together that talk and you're looking at 7 doctrines to rule the world, what made you include Reformed Confessionalism as one of the doctrines necessary in order for Christians to build Christendom 2.0?
Yeah, 2 words there, Reformed, and then Confessionalism, the Reformed piece. One, because I think it's true, and so I am Reformed in my soteriology and many other aspects of my theology as well, besides just the doctrine of salvation. And so 1, I think it's true, but 2, and kind of a 30,000-foot view, the first, I think, key element of ruling the world righteously is to rightly recognize that in the ultimate sense, you don't rule the world. I think a lot of the utopian idealism that quickly devolves into a dystopian hellscape is one of the common denominators that they all have as their foundational piece, is that man is autonomous and that he really is the ultimate ruler. And so I think firstly recognizing the Reformed piece, which deals with soteriology, but the bigger aspect of that is just God's sovereignty in everything, beyond just salvation and election and those kinds of things, but that God really is sovereign in everything. As R.C. Sproul once famously said, there's not one maverick molecule in all the universe, that everything is being orchestrated and ordained by God. And so first to recognize that he is the rightful one true ruler of all things, and that he stands supreme and sovereign above all of creation, that he's orchestrating everything according to the counsel of his own will, for his glory and for his good pleasure. And then, once that's been firmly established, then understanding as viceroys and regents, as the human agency underneath the sovereign rule of God, that we are called to take dominion over the earth, and that God has preordained that man should be, of all the created creatures in the earthly cosmos, that we should reign as dominant and supreme, exercising righteous rule and godly stewardship over the created order. And I think a lot of Christians today, modern Christians, they think that the key is to forsake rule, and but biblically the impetus isn't on not ruling, but rather ruling righteously. So we should be reformed in that sense, recognizing God as the rightful ruler. He's sovereign over all things, and then we're stepping in as his viceroys and regents over the created order, to push back against the curse that's on the earthly cosmos and to establish Christ's rule and reign over all the earth by exercising godly dominion and stewardship. So that's the Reformed piece. And the confessional piece, in a nutshell, is just that just to say that there are old ways of doing these things and understanding biblical truth and understanding general revelation as well as special revelation, the world that God made, um, and and that for the last 400 or 500 years, I don't think that we've improved upon the work that our fathers have already done. And part of the reason that we regress instead of experiencing progress is because of, like you said, Nate, our arrogance and wanting to reinvent the wheel. With each generation, it seems like we're suspicious of everyone that's come before us, and so we spend our entire lives. We only live on this earth for so long, and there's only so much that we can discover and accomplish. And when you spend, the first 60 years of your 70 or 80 years of life questioning whether or not the 66 books of the Bible really should be there, and whether or not we actually have, an accurate translation, you devote your entire life to Hebrew and Aramaic and Greek, and after 60 years, your conclusion is usually that, the NASB will do just fine, the ESV will do just fine, the King James might do a little better. But basically, you spent your entire life to simply confirm work that's already been done, and so confessionalism is just that's translations of the scripture, but it's that same principle applied to the realm of interpreting the scripture rightly on the main key points, not on everything. People think that if you're confessional that you can't really talk about anything else. The confession it deals with a lot, but there's a ton of things that, like, the confession doesn't specify head coverings. The confession, much to many people's chagrin, it doesn't specify mermaids or fairies. So you could go either way. Even primary water, you could go either way on those. So there's plenty of things that you do need to um, you have to arrive on a decision, and you want to do so prayerfully and carefully with the witness of church history over the ages. But the confession at least gives you a starting place. Many Christians they're coming to the Christian faith starting with a blank slate, and they waste their lives to come up with a few doctrinal truths, and they could have started with hundreds of doctrinal truths and progressed from there if they would have simply obeyed the fifth commandment and honored their fathers.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
that's it. One of the things that I was thinking as you're talking about that is I was trying to, you know, discern what is it that makes us suspicious. That's the word you used, suspicious of sort of the faith of our fathers. And and part of it has to be sort of the evolutionary thinking that seeped into so much of the evangelical church, right? We have this idea that the back in the years, you go back a few hundred years when they're penning the Westminster Confession or the London Baptist Confession, they're not as progressed. There's this evolutionary view of progression that where we are living now is at the pinnacle of sort of our intellect, our academics, and all this kind of stuff. And I remember you saying something at the conference that really stuck out to me when you said, I don't think we have anywhere. Right. And I think, you're at a conference there with Doug Wilson and Joe Boot, some brilliant minds. But you said something that really rang true to me where you just said, I don't think we have a mind like John Calvin's living right now. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think we have those minds anymore. I think those were blessings that God gave to the church at a particular time. And men like Doug Wilson and Joe Boot and by God's grace, you and I and Chris, we get to take their brilliant minds and everything that they've unpacked from Scripture and the way in which they've codified it in wonderful works that I think will last. But we don't have those minds anymore. And I think that arrogance that comes with the idea that we can add to, or we can progress, or we can start from scratch and build something better, it comes from this evolutionary idea that people in the past were dumb and we're smart and more evolved now.
That's a great point. Yeah, I
Um,
agree.
I was just going to say, I think it's funny that we're all trying to recapture manhood from the 50s, the 60s, the 30s, the 40s, the men that would run through a foxhole, run out of a trench. Yet we don't want to base our foundation on the things that those men based their foundation on, which were the Westminster Confession, the London Baptist Confession. We want to do something new to reclaim something that we have lost, and that idea just doesn't make any sense to me. And so at the conference, Joel, you said something that stuck with me, and I think about this often. Is just like we're in a war right now, a cultural war. We don't actually have time to go back and redig the wells, to redig all, like just adopt the confessions that have historically stood the test of time, because we're in a fight right now. This isn't peacetime to reevaluate things. And I thought that was really interesting in our current culture in Canada, in the States, just in terms of the cultural battles we're fighting, right?
Right. Yeah. I think, I think that the Reformation was the high watermark of Christendom. And I think that it's, that we've only devolved since then. I'm post-millennial in my eschatology, so I'm bullish in the long term, a little bearish in the short term. But in the long term, I think that, we get back there, just like the stock market. If you have a correction, eventually you get back to all-time highs, and then you eventually proceed from there and set new all-time highs. So I think that will happen. I don't know if it'll happen in our lifetimes, but I think that, by the grace of God, that will happen. But I think just recognizing where you currently are, and just realizing that right now we are in a significant dip in this, to use that stock market analogy. And I think, that one of the ways you can ascertain that is not just by looking at the doctrines themselves, but, Jesus said that you can recognize a tree, whether or not it's good or bad, by looking at its fruit. And so we can look back to previous time periods and cultures and nations, societies, and like right now, I mean, even if you were, like some alien species watching, from a distance and surveying, the human populace, and you would look back, and you would see European countries just a few centuries ago with, ballroom dancing and high arts, and cathedrals being built, and philosophers, and all these things, and then you would look at today, and you would see women gyrating on TikTok and murdering their babies and cutting off boys' penises. So when that's where we are, I think you just have to call a spade, and so, I think everything you said about Darwinianism has strong explanatory power. I think that that's insightful, to think that, because Darwinianism, it basically asserts that there are no dips in the stock market. That it's just a constant, gradual incline, and so, every, present generation would always be superior to the generations that preceded them. And so I think that that's really helpful. I also think that another, explanation would be that part of our suspicion of what Thomas Watson, he wrote a book on the Ten Commandments, and as he talks about the fifth commandment, honoring your fathers, he bifurcates and lays out a few different kinds or types of fathers. And so there are, the literal, natural, familial fathers in our home, your immediate human, earthly father. But then he talks about spiritual fathers, like ecclesiastical fathers in the church, and bishops and pastors, and but then he also talks about civil fathers. He references Constantine as a positive example of a father that was zealous for the truth, and he cites as his case study. He says, see what a benevolent father Constantine was, with such zeal. He suppressed blasphemies and persecuted those who would harm the church. And so he says that is a good thing. And so my point is, like today, like we can't even say that. The average evangelical pastor would clutch his gay pearls, if he heard Thomas Watson speaking about Constantine being a benevolent father who suppressed heresies and persecuted blasphemers. And so you're in GMI. Like for our generation, we're just not going to make it. My goal is that that my sons might be one day, by the grace of God, become men. But for our generation, we don't have men. So we're not gonna make it. Not in the next 30, 40 years. That's my assessment. So my goal is just to do the best, so that we could have some Thomas Watsons and John Calvins and Luthers in future generations. But right now, the Darwinian explanation, I think, is profound, but also, Thomas Watson, he talks about ancient fathers. I think one of the reasons we're suspicious of our ancient fathers is because of our immediate fathers. We've been lied to so much by our fathers of the of the 60s and the 40s, and our fathers of the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and so we have all these young men who are realizing now over these past few years that all of their fathers lied to them. And so what happens is you just have a culture that is just generally suspicious of all fathers. So if all of our immediate fathers lie to us, then we begin to project that, I think, on fathers of the past and ancient fathers. And so we think that the Council of Nicaea, that those fathers lied to us too, and that Constantine, he actually was the guy who decided the 66 books of the Bible, and we can't really know, and blah blah. So you just spiral, but then you have no anchor. There's no sure footing for progress, and so you don't make any. I don't think our generation is going to make progress. I think our generation is going to devote itself to trying to prove that the Earth is flat and that the moon landing never happened. And I just think that's where we're at. It's sad, but that is where we're at. That's the best of men in our current culture. The worst of men are just hooking up with the gyrating women on TikTok. So the best of men are questioning the moon landing. That's the best contribution that our generation has to offer. So it's just, we're not going to make it.
So it's it's interesting. I think that's there's a lot of profound cultural insight there, Joel, and I think so there's two kind of directions I want to take it. So two different questions, and you can decide which one you want to go to first. But it sounds like I think that's a really profound insight to think that we sort of reject our ancient fathers and the work that they did because we are rejecting our immediate fathers. And we are, a generation that, we're the first generation that really, we're all probably around the same age, somewhere around the 40 range. And so we're sort of the first generation en masse from broken families. We're the first generation en masse where our parents didn't stay together, our fathers ran out on our mothers or whatever, and so you have this suspicion of our earthly fathers, which we project onto our heavenly Father, and obviously all of the ecclesiastical fathers, the political fathers that you were talking about. And so it seems to me like one of the most pressing issues in front of us, if we want to turn this around, is simply for us to be good fathers again, right?
Yes.
Reclaim the image that our kids have of fathers, so that perhaps our sons and our grandsons can trust fatherhood again. Would you say
Right.
that that's a good endeavor or a good application for this?
That's great. I think that's very insightful. And so we have to model fatherhood. We have to reclaim godly fatherhood, but you can't do that in a vacuum. So I don't think that our generation will be able to become good fathers without returning to better fathers. And so I think that if we stand a chance for our sons to become good men, then we have to be good men. We have to be good fathers. And if we're going to be good fathers, then we need some kind of example to emulate. But it's tough because I think the well has been poisoned. So I don't think there are in general. So I'm not saying there aren't any singular exceptions. Sure, we can point to in isolated cases, independent individual men who are good fathers today, or have been in the last 100 years. But in general, we have a fatherless generation, fathers who have lied, fathers who have fled, who have abandoned, who have failed, and our fathers have not only opted for being bad fathers themselves, but also poisoning the well against prior fathers, ancient fathers. And so anyway, so if we're going to have good men in the future, we need to be good fathers today. If we're going to be good fathers today, we have to go back to good fathers of the past. And the difficulty is that our recent, more immediate fathers have poisoned that well, and told us that there are no good fathers. There's never been any good fathers. And so the high watermark, the Reformation, and um, looking at the reformers and looking at even at those who preceded them throughout church history and just world history, there are plenty of good fathers if you just zoom out and pull back a few centuries. But all those fathers have been tainted, and so I think that's part of the difficulty. Is here we are aborting 70 million babies in their mother's womb, and putting axe wounds between the legs of young boys, and yet Jonathan Edwards is a bad father because he was racist. So like it's so long as like honestly, you guys maybe don't want to talk about this, but so long as we continue to entertain made up sins that were intentionally devised to poison the well against our prior fathers, then we're not going to have any example to emulate to be fathers ourselves, and then our sons will grow up fatherless, and they'll be deadbeat men as well.
Yeah. It's interesting that it seems to me like, and you brought up racism, so let's chat there for just a moment. And what I mean by that is, it seems to me like a lot of the guys who run in similar circles to us, Joel, and I don't say that to pump our own tires at all, but I would just say that I think a lot of us who are in the sort of reformed, post-millennial sphere of trying to be a positive change in terms of cultural engagement, there are a few small circles running, and I think when you begin to push back against the spirit of the age, when you see men who are trying to recapture, the kind of masculinity, the kind of leadership, the kind of righteousness that's required to be the good fathers that we're talking about here, it's amazing to me how the enemies of God of all different ranks and colors and subcategories kind of band together to attack those men. And you said kind of begin to make up sins,
Mm-hmm.
whether we want to talk about tone policing or just being mean, whether it's talking about the accusation of racism for those who might talk against the BLM stuff and CRT. It seems as though the sabotage that's coming for the men who are trying to do what we're talking about here is to begin to make up sins based on the tone or the type of cultural engagement that's going on. Do you want to talk to that a little bit? Because I think that's part of what you're hinting at there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of gatekeepers, just in the world at large, not just the church, and but all the gatekeepers are actively shooting themselves in the foot every single day and discrediting themselves, and so then you have and that just adds to the fatherless epidemic, of, well, I can't trust anybody. Every institution has discredited itself: the media, medicine, certainly the state, and politicians, and so all these things, and sadly the evangelical church is no exception. And so guys are looking for to be grounded, and there doesn't seem to be anything that's trustworthy, credible, or true. However, the thing that I've been noticing is that there really are, if you get outside of the institutions and outside of the gatekeeping phenomenon that we currently are experiencing, there actually are. It's not just some fringe group, 14 guys sitting in their mother's basements, but there are millions, actually millions, and that's not hyperbole. Thousands would be inaccurate, but there are millions of young men that really are, I think, wanting to push back. They are, they have a holy suspicion, a righteous suspicion of the current status quo, and but the church, a lot of the leadership in the church is just condemning them, and so it's tough. Like it's difficult Like I think the fields are white for the harvest, but they're not white for the harvest in Manhattan. I think that's where Tim Keller was wrong. I don't think it's our coastal elites and all these progressives and liberals, that are just so ripe for the gospel. It's not that God can't save them; God can save anybody. He saved the Apostle Paul, as he was hard-hearted and on his way to persecute more Christians. So it's not to say that any group of people, whether it be by class or political affiliation, economics, or by race or any other subdividing mechanism. There's not one group that currently in this gospel um, dispensation that is completely hardened to the gospel to where no one can be saved at all. Even if you hold the view of a future revival among um, ethnic Jews, which I personally don't. I take the partial preterist view, and I think that's already occurred in AD 70. But even if that's your view, and I understand if it is, that's the lion's share of the Puritans' theology and much of the Reformers, and so that's a perfectly orthodox position to hold. But even if that's your view, then you would have to say, per Romans 11, that we're currently in an age, a time period, where there is a partial hardening on the Jewish people. So even in their case, it's not total, meaning that you can send missionaries to Israel and it'll probably be a trickle. It probably won't be a landslide of conversion, but there would still be some conversions. There would be some who are being saved. Meanwhile, among Gentile nations, there are often many, in Brazil or in China or Russia or many places where Gentiles are flooding to Mount Zion, and then other places like Israel where there's a trickle rather than a flood. But the point is that there's no group that's entirely ostracized in this present gospel age. Satan has been bound. He's no longer able to deceive the nations as he once was. And so people of every tribe, tongue, and nation are coming to Christ in salvation. So all that being said, no matter how you split up the world, whether doing it by nations or whether doing it by other subcategories of class or economics or ethnicity within one nation, no matter how you split it, some people can be saved. However, so that's my disclaimer. However, in general, the 30,000-foot view, I think you have a trickle of coastal elites, progressives, Democrats coming to Christ. In flyover country, with all the Neanderthals, who nobody thinks are important, or they're of little estate. I think that's where you see the fields actually ripe for the harvest. There are tons, I mean millions of young men who I really do think many are being converted, and many more I think are ripe and ready for conversion. But the church has all but just outright said that we're not interested in those people. We're not interested in hillbilly elegy. We're not interested in J.D. Vance, and his roots, and Appalachia. Like we're not interested in these people. They're primitive. They're stupid. They're blue collar. They're manual laborers, and the church hates them. And so anyway, so all that being said, I think that there's massive opportunity there, but to reach a lot of these young men, you really do have to go back to, I think, ancient fathers and stand on something that's true. One thing that a common denominator that these young men despise is modernity. They will not listen to you if you just echo the post-war sentiment of the greatest sins of all of humanity is racism and homophobia and anti-Semitism. Then that's fine, but you'll just have to move to Manhattan and settle for one conversion every 10 years. But you're Appalachia, they're done with you.
So there's a, I want to go back. So there's something that you said that I thought was really, really profound, and I want to kind of ask your thoughts on this. So institutions are failing. there are people who are suspicious of everything. COVID was a great blessing of God that began to separate the wheat and the chaff, began to reveal the wolves that were in sheep's clothing and all kinds of things. I think Megan Basham's book, Shepherds for Sale, and some of the stuff that was going on that's been revealed during this time. And so you have a group of young men that you've just described who are suspicious. They're suspicious of what they've been told. They're suspicious of, mass conspiracy because all the elites, that all the people that they were told to trust, told them to stay home and stay safe and take a jab and all this kind of stuff. And so there's this suspicion and this sort of conspiratorial curiosity that was confirmed during COVID. And so you're talking before about those who are questioning the moon landing and all that kind of stuff. And hey, I'm right there. I'll get on that bandwagon. I'll talk about that all day with you. But when we start to take that curiosity and that suspicion and we start to point it at things like the confessions, the early church fathers, the canonization of scripture, obviously there's a problem there. So what would you just say pastorally to that young guy whose suspicions were confirmed during COVID, who's now looking at everything and questioning everything because they saw how mass the lies and the hysteria can get, and they're beginning to turn that suspicion on the church fathers? How do you draw a line for that guy? How do you help him root himself where he's supposed to be rooted, but carry on a healthy suspicion that's good in a lot of ways? It means that you won't get sucked into the vacuum. But how do you help a young man pastorally draw that line?
That's a great question. Real quick thought though on the moon landing, just in passing, because it's fun. This is my just so the listener knows, like my position. If Uganda landed on the moon, and that was the history that they got there first. They planted Ugandan flag, and everybody was suspicious of it. And we're pointing out evidences and proofs that it didn't actually happen. I might entertain it. But that's not the story. It's that America landed on the moon, and it's the year of our Lord 2024. Anti-white discrimination is provable. It's on the books. It's on the books with Harvard. It's at DEI. It's everywhere. It's literally ingrained in law and policy with universities and with hospitals and thousands of corporations. So the reason why I don't give much credence to the suspicion of the moon landing is because I really am convinced that it's anti-white discrimination. I think it's just one more way to say that Western civilization isn't that great, and we don't have any real achievements, and we've never done anything of substantial value. So that's my position.
Fair enough.
If a bunch of people were questioning, black people landing on the moon in 2024, where for the most part people hate white people and love black people, then I'd be like, okay, well, this goes against the grain. This goes against the narrative is that white people suck and people of color are awesome, and yet they're still questioning an alleged achievement of people of color. Man, they might have a reason for questioning it. But when you question achievement from white people and it's 2024 and everybody's woke, then to me it's just par for the course. Oh, of course you're questioning something that white people did. So anyways, so to answer your question, how do you keep from going down the rabbit hole to where you question everything? I did a post a while back. I think that it's helpful to have labels. The thing you want to avoid is what I would call being a contrarian. So there are young men that I'll talk to that reach out to me, that they email me, or even young men who come to the church, and I have conversations with them, and even from a pastoral standpoint of guys who are members in the church, and so counseling them and helping them walk through some of their suspicions, and some of those suspicions I think being well founded, and then some of them not. And one of the things that I try to help them discover is if you're the kind of person that I can essentially I can get you to agree with anything, like literally anything. I can basically almost like total control. I can to like a 95 percentile of accuracy. I can verbatim, almost verbatim, get you to say an entire sentence that I want you to say, simply by telling you a lot of people are saying, or a lot of people believe, and I can just get you to pledge your undying allegiance to the opposite, to say the opposite, to believe the opposite. Then you're not a critical thinker. You're a contrarian, and there's a drastic difference. We want critical thinkers, and critical thinkers, at times, they will entertain certain conspiracies, because certain conspiracies turn out not to be conspiracies at all, but simply the truth. So we want critical thinkers, and young men, I think, by nature, are suspicious. Women, I mean, they've done studies on this from a mental standpoint, psychological standpoint. Women by nature are more trusting than men, and I think that's God's design. That's a good thing. It's not a good thing when you have the 19th Amendment and TikTok, and Kamala Harris is running for president, and saying that my campaign is a campaign of joy. Well, then the natural trusting disposition of women becomes the absolute destruction of an entire nation. But so long as women are fulfilling the role that God's called them to, predominantly being in the home, a domestic role of help meet for their husband, and a mother, nurturing and training their children. Well, in that context, a generally trusting disposition is an incredible strength. It's an incredible advantage. It's wonderful. But men are not that way, and I think likewise by design. I don't think that's part of the curse. That gets all things that the curse doesn't destroy nature, but what it does is it perverts nature. It dilutes, and it doesn't utterly eradicate nature. If it did, then we couldn't even hold to the Imago Dei. We believe that the image of God has been tarnished by the curse, but a vestige of the image of God does remain intact, so that all people, are still made in the image of God. And likewise, not only do we bear the Imago Dei, the image of God, but I think that men and women, in a general sense, sin perverts and distorts, but it doesn't utterly destroy. The curse has not utterly destroyed God's created order, and nature has not been destroyed by sin in the same way that grace doesn't destroy nature or eradicate it, but rather elevates and perfects nature. It takes the perversion, the distortion that's currently on nature, and it gets rid of not nature, but it gets rid of the distortion, so that nature is then purified and restored back to God's design. So my point is that grace doesn't eradicate nature, neither does the curse of sin eradicate nature. Nature remains intact, and so there are distortions, and there, by grace, are elevations, but in a general sense, nature is there. So part of nature, I think, my point is that the suspicion of men, I think, is belonging to nature and not belonging to the curse. I think it's natural, and so therefore I think that it is generally, it is a basically good sentiment, a sentiment that can be distorted and misdirected and perverted, but in a general sense, it's a good sentiment. So the first thing that I think you have to do, right? We keep talking about fathers, so to go back to that mold, the Scripture commands fathers not to exasperate their sons. So I think the first thing that you need to do is not condemn their sons for precisely that which God has instilled in them by nature. If you look at a young man and you take that which is innate to him by design and begin to disparage it, then you've lost him, and you'll probably never win him back. But if you affirm that which is there by nature and by design, if you start with an affirmation, and then a correction. And the correction isn't to obliterate his nature, but to reorient and properly direct his nature towards the good, the true, and the beautiful. Then you have a fighting chance of winning that man's heart. there's all, I know it's cliche, but there really is a crown in the gutter right now. And it's like I think about this sometimes. It's like, so under, people post on Twitter, under Christian nationalism, illegals will be deported, or under Christian nationalism, and then they get silly with it, and humorous, like under Christian nationalism, men will not be allowed to watch anime, or under Christian nationalism, all pit bulls, will be euthanized, and I'm here for that, but anyways, but I would say, in a serious sense, under Christian nationalism, Joel Webbon would not have a YouTube channel. What I mean by that is, the fact that I have over 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, and there are, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of predominantly young men listening to things that I have to say, that is a proof of everything I've said thus far, that we are no longer at the high watermark of civilization and society. In times past, you would have to have credentials that meant something. Institutions matter, especially with a population. It's one thing if it's, if you're the original settlers, but even they, saw the need immediately for institutions. But it'd be one thing if you had a small population, and it's in the beginning stages of formalizing, nationhood and those kinds of things. But if you're 250 years in, and you have a population of 330 million people, and you're also acutely diverse in terms of both nationality and ethnicity, and but also, a wide, pay gap, and ranging with economic, different statuses, and all these different things, then you can't, it's not sustainable apart from institutions. You need institutional credibility. Like, once upon a time, a journalist was a respectable profession. It's not today. I mean, like you don't hate journalists enough, and that is true. You and me, all of us. Like if there's anything, when I wake up in the morning, it's like, God, help me to love you with all my heart, my soul, my strength, and my mind, and help me to hate journalists even more than I did yesterday. Like, that's a good prayer. And so, but my point is, there was a time where, like, the New York Times, if they said something that was proven to be false, they would have to print a retraction on the very first page the following day. YouTubers don't do that, and my point is, I don't do that. Like, that's not a good sign. It's not a good sign when guys are having to, to weed through millions and millions and trillions even of pieces of content on the internet to try to find someone who's not lying to them. And right now, I mean, in a basic sense, you have two options. You have accredited liars, or unaccredited guys who are trying to tell the truth. But, so it's not nefarious or malicious, but I make mistakes. I say things that, like, a year later, I'm like, oh, whoops, my bad, and I didn't mean to. So, like, the difference is CNN is accredited, and they mean to lie to you. They're actually malicious. And the difference is, CNN is evil and Joel is dumb. Those are your choices. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not evil by the grace of God, but I, like, under Christian nationalism, my point is, under Christian nationalism, I would not be given, the public square and a podium to speak to the masses, and, like, because I don't have the credentials. I don't, and I want to be willing to admit that. I want to be consistent. I'm not the smartest guy, but I'd like to think that I've got a decent heart by the grace of God, and so I can, at least in my morals and my character, be consistent. And so I long for a day where there are no more Joel Webbons, because you actually do have credible institutions with people who have real credentials. They're qualified for the task, and they're not demons. But right now, we just don't have that. You don't, like, your choices are smart demons or dumb saints, and that's pretty much, those are the options before. So, all that being said, what do you do to the young man to keep him from spiraling into everything's a conspiracy, and I don't trust anything, I'm suspicious of everything? Help, first, I think you have to affirm the general sentiment of what it is by nature and God's design to be a man. And part of that, you're called to be a provider, but you're also called to be a protector. And one of the key characteristics of protection, of being a guardian, is a holy suspicion. A good guardian is not all trusting. Women, part of the reason they're not called to protect is because by nature they are more trusting. And those who are, if somebody, I'm not saying women are all trusting, but if you had an individual person, man or female, who was all trusting, the last position you would want to put them in is, a bodyguard or something like that. It's just not a good fit. And so men are by nature suspicious because they are by virtue and by calling, their vocation, they should be at least guardians and protectors. And guardians and protectors, good guardians, are suspicious. So first, you don't want to be a father who exasperates your sons. You want to actually affirm that which is good and true and beautiful, and not go against his nature. I think a lot of evangelical pastors right now, even in the Reformed world, part of the reason they're losing young men is because they're not trying to redirect nature. They're trying to obliterate the nature, the natural disposition of young men, and they will lose them. They will not win with that strategy. So it's just not going to work. And that is like, well, I don't understand why all the men, are going to Andrew Tate. I understand it. And I'm shocked that pastors, by and large, don't understand it. I think they do. I think they just aren't willing to admit it because the explanatory power for why so many young men are going to Andrew Tate is because pastors are effeminate and gay. That's why. That's why. Young men aren't going to follow you. They don't follow titles. They follow courage. Men will follow courage. And so first you have to be a man, and then you have to affirm the manhood, the masculinity and those things by nature which are good and right in a man, and then then begin to work with his conspiracies one by one and show him why his suspicion in one arena is good and right, and then why his suspicion in another arena is not actually critical thinking, but just simply being a contrarian, and then show him why that's not manly. See, the contrarian, the part of the reason why it's wrong is not just because in a definitive, objective sense it's untrue, but part of the reason it's wrong is because it's not masculine. It's effeminate. Being a contrarian appeals to effeminate men because it's easy. Because masculinity works. So both protection and provision, they both require a work ethic. They require sweat of the brow and blood. It's hard work. Being a contrarian, the reason it appeals is because you can bypass hard work. Being a contrarian, you don't have to do hours of research and study. Being a contrarian, all you have to do is put your finger in the air and then just be the opposite of a politician. They're going to put their finger in the air, and wherever the wind is blowing, they go that way. The contrarian does the same thing, just he goes whatever direction the wind is blowing, he goes the opposite way. But in both cases, it's feckless. It's both cowardice and apathy. It's laziness, and neither one is becoming of a masculine man. And so I think you be a masculine man, and then two, affirm the masculine general sentiment in the men that you're trying to lead. Don't just disparage them and exasperate them, and then show them why being a contrarian is. Show them why it's fake and gay, as Andrew would say. Hey, you know why you shouldn't do this? Not just because it's definitively untrue and blah blah blah. You shouldn't do it because it's really kind of, I'm embarrassed for you. It's really effeminate. It's fake and gay. And they're like, what? No, I'm not fake and gay. Like, what do you mean? And then begin to show them that there's a difference between critical thinking and contrarian thinking.
That is brilliant. I loved everything you said there, Joel. I'm gonna start tweeting out and posting all the time, faking gay to everybody's like weird conspiracies. Be like, because that's brilliant. I was, as you were talking, I was thinking about the what you said about the lack of courage to actually take a stand, not just go the opposite way that the culture is going. Is really really insightful. I think of like when we're thinking about elders in churches and pastors in churches, one of the commandments for us who lead is be able to teach sound doctrine and refute false doctrine, right? And that is that idea. The contrarian can't do that because
that's right.
Even if it's true, they go the opposite way, regardless, and they just assume that because people lie, they're always lying, and we know that just because people sometimes lie doesn't mean they're always lying, right?
Right.
And that idea. So
It's a defeatist, Chris. You're absolutely right. It's also so it's faking gay. It's effeminate. It's not masculine. All those kind of. It avoids hard work. It avoids courage. But it's also it's a defeatist mentality, because what it assumes is it assumes that the masses are always wrong. It's just anti-Christian. That's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches, yeah, we have verses that talk about tickling ears, and many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, we did. Like, that is true. There are seasons and generations and particular times with particular people in particular places where the majority of a particular society at a particular age, a particular time period, moment in history, and a particular place would be deceived on a particular item. But to assume that all peoples in all times and all places will be, the majority will be deceived on all things. So if that's your basic presupposition, is that throughout the entirety of human history, the majority of people will be deceived on everything in every time and in every place, then being a contrarian makes sense. You're working from that basic presupposition. Whereas I think the reason why I despise the contrarian sentiment is because I'm postmillennial. I actually just reject that from a biblical standpoint. I don't believe that human history has been set in the stars in a fatalistic sense by God. That everyone will always be wrong about everything. I don't believe that. And if you do believe that, then you have no explanation. You just have to stop for a second and realize that you have no way of explaining anything. You have no way of explaining irrigation. You have no way of explaining electricity. You have no way of explaining certain modern miracles of medicine. You have no way of explaining the technology we're using right now to do a podcast. Like, how does man ever make any discovery that's true and good and beautiful? If man is destined, the majority of men destined to be wrong about everything, it doesn't make logical sense.
Right. Yeah, that's good.
That's great.
It seems as though, one of the verses I know, I've seen you quote it many times. I know our friends over in Ogden like to quote it a lot, coming from Proverbs 25, where it talks about it's the glory of God to conceal things, it's the glory of kings to search things out. And really, at the end of the day, we're talking about reclaiming masculinity. We're talking about kind of rehitching ourselves to the apostolic faith that was once and for all delivered to the saints. We're talking about kind of re-honoring the great fathers of the past in Christendom, in the church, in the political realm. And what we're talking about is taking up that kingly duty of taking responsibility. And maybe as we wrap up our conversation here, it's a good time to kind of plug the next Right Response conference, because one of the phrases that I've liked is just whether you want to use inverse world or inverted world or
Found world.
trash world,
Yeah,
however
there's
you want to
lots of.
say it. Right, we're living in trash world, and it is the job of kings to search out all of the lies, to make sure that we are not entangled with those lies, to liberate those who have been held captive by those lies, and to show them a better way. And what it makes me think of is in Acts 17, when Paul and Silas, they come and they're charged with turning the world upside down, right? And you think about that, it's essentially what they're charged with is, from the world's perspective, it looks like they're turning the world upside down, but from God's perspective, they're beginning to turn the world right side up.
Right.
Right, they're beginning to, essentially, that could read in a modern translation, if you wanted to do Joel Webbon's Message Bible translation, could be that they get charged with defeating trash world,
Right.
and the idea there is that, we have to reclaim the responsibility, and at the heart of masculinity is taking responsibility. We have to take responsibility for properly looking to reveal the things that God has revealed to us. and properly discerning where have we been taken captive by lies, where has our culture been taken captive by lies, and take on the responsibility of trying to liberate those who have been enslaved by it. So really, I mean, we want to talk. We wanted to talk about confessionalism and kind of reclaiming the ecumenical creeds and historic confessions of the church, but really, we're talking about the character that gets you there. The kind of masculinity that gets us back to that sort of Christianity is the kind of masculinity that attacks lies boldly and courageously and embraces the truth that has been passed down from our fathers. We're suspicious of the right things and we're bullish about the right things. And it seems like that's the kind of masculinity that we need to reclaim if we actually want worthwhile role model fathers again.
Amen. That's good.
Yeah. Anything you want to add as we close up here, Chris?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question that has nothing to do with any of this or primary water. I just wanted to ask you, what's the best part about being a pastor in Texas? So I was thinking about that when I was down there. It's like doing ministry in Texas is a different beast, I think, than it is in like southwestern Ontario. So I was
sure.
curious, and I didn't get a chance to talk to you at the conference. So
Yeah, I don't know. It is different. I pastored in California for a while, and so it's certainly different. I think one of the main differences is, but it's hard to say because the church that I pastored in California was just at a different life stage. Like they were younger, and the church is still there, and they're doing great. They're thriving. It's great. They started a classical Christian school. They got a building. By God's grace, I was able to leave the church there with zero debt and about $600,000 in the bank, and so they were able to get property and all these things, and I had raised up leaders, and so I didn't just, for the record, I didn't just abandon the church to be utterly destroyed. So they're doing great. Yeah, they're doing better than when I was there. But what I was going to say is, so part of this might just be life stage because the church was younger, and it may not be true today any longer. But from my memory, the church there was it just we didn't there weren't as many big families, large families. I think that was one of the major differences. Now, I don't know if that's true. I don't know the exact demographic of that church now today. I assume there probably are a lot more children than when I was there. But the average family in my church here in Texas is really large. I mean, we have lots of families with 10 children, and on average it's probably 5 or 6 children is the average. Some have, and even the ones that have 2 or 3, they're all pretty much, the only reason they have 2 or 3 is because the husband and wife have been married for 4 years, or and they plan to have more. So I think that's one of the big differences, and part of that's cultural. But one of the biggest things right now, as you look just geographically, is so much of the culture is shaped by economics and what people can afford, sadly. And so a lot of places, in Europe, the UK. I mean, France is just like, I just don't even consider it a part of Europe, at this point. But like France is just an outpost in the west of the Middle East, in Islam. Um, but a lot of places in Europe and a lot of coastal places in the U.S., Canada would be another example. Australia would be an example. New Zealand would be an example. California, New York, all these kinds of places. It's just unbearable economically. From tax policies to cost of living to all these different things. And so I think, all that being said, one of the biggest differences of pastoring in Texas is the privilege of pastoring families, where pretty much everybody, is a one income family. Husband works, outside of the home. The wife has the privilege of getting to be a mother and not having to supplement her husband's income by working, and the kids they're at home. They're either in a private Christian school or in many cases homeschooled. And so it's just been a breath of fresh air, a privilege to get to pastor a church with the with the what was meant to be the typical family dynamic, how families always used to be forever and ever and ever until very recently. And so that's been a joy.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Everything's bigger in Texas, even families, is what I heard there.
Seriously, the families, now each individual person and their weight, that's probably also bigger in Texas. We don't like that one, but yeah, the families are bigger in Texas.
Awesome. Thanks, Joel.
Yeah.
Well, we want to close off. Thank you so much for your time, Joel. And we do want to plug. I know we had, like I said, this series was sort of birthed out of Chris and I just chit chatting in the long drive and home from Texas when we were there for the Right Response Conference last year. But this coming year, it's April 3rd, 2025 to April 5th.
Yes,
which is, I think, a Thursday to a Saturday. The conference this year is called Christ is King, How to Defeat Trashworld. And you have everybody there from A.D. Robles to Ben Garrett's back and Dusty Devers and John Harris. I think Jeff Durbin's there this year.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be there. So it looks like another great lineup.
Yeah, I'm trying to, real quick, Nate, people have asked me, not a lot of people, I think most people are excited about it. But I'm trying to this year. So last year, when you guys were there, I tried to be very specific doctrinally and saying that this is what I subscribe to.
Yep.
These 7 doctrines, I think they're right. Like shocker, like people will be like, "You're arrogant. You think you're right." Everyone thinks they're right.
Right.
Like,
That's why we do what we do.
Show me the guy who holds a certain position while knowing that it's wrong. I'd like to meet that guy. So yeah, I think I'm right about the things that I believe. Shocker. But anyway, so that was more doctrinally specific in particular. I think these doctrines, whereas this one, not all the guys, as you guys probably are aware, we've got like 15 speakers. They're not all post-millennial. They're not all. So I've got ranging from Stephen Wolfe, who would be he's I don't have anybody, by the grace of God, I don't have anybody who's R2K. So everybody has like. The requirement was sanity. You have to at least be sane to speak at the conference. So, so
seems like a low bar, but
yeah,
these days,
Escondido, sorry guys, no invite, but and I'm sure it's mutual that they would never invite me. But so you got the classical 2K guys, Protestant magisterial reformer guys like Stephen Wolfe, who's all mill, and is going to put more emphasis on natural law than I would, but then you also have Jeff Durbin, who's post-mill theonomist, and David Reese is a post-mill theonomist, and Dusty Devers, and so it's all kind of, and then I've got, Steve Dace, and Orrin McIntyre from the Blaze, and Steve Dace, he doesn't put a ton of emphasis on it all the time, so I think he's not like diehard, dispy, like give me dispensationalism lest I die. Like he's not that insufferable, but the thing is, but if you had to place him in a theological category, I think he is technically, on the dispensational premillennial side. But the point is that he's a fighter. And so that was kind of my mindset for this year was I'm going to actually intentionally get kind of an array, across the spectrum of everybody being, Orthodox and evangelical. I don't have any atheists speaking at the conference. Everybody's Christian. They're all evangelical. I don't even have, Eastern Orthodox or a Roman Catholic. They're all evangelical Christians. But intentionally within that larger framework, still the whole gambit is represented. But the one thing that everybody has in common is not just believing that we can win, eventually or 50,000 years in the future, but believing like maybe we could win, relatively soon. Maybe there's actually some very practical. So last time it was doctrinal. This time it's going to be more practical.
Awesome. That sounds great. I think one of the great blessings, certainly we've experienced this at our church, as we, Canada looked a lot different than Texas during COVID lockdowns.
Right.
Probably looked a little bit more like California at the time,
Yes.
but Toronto was the most locked down city in the world. And what happened with the few churches like ours that stayed open and stood on their convictions and acted courageously was we got filled with people from every walk of life, every doctrinal conviction,
Exactly.
every denomination. And that's exactly right. I loved what you said there is like what we did get filled with was a bunch of fighters.
Exactly.
And we have really colorful conversations about theonomy and natural law and eschatology and baptism. But we know who we're fighting with, and
Right.
everybody's weapons are pointed in the same direction.
Amen. Yeah. Same here. It's like when pre 2020, everybody in my church was a Calvinist, because that's what you would come for. Like, I'm
Right.
looking for a Reformed church. Like, guys who are still in that mold. I'm not saying leave your traditions and leave your heritage. Like, if you're Reformed, I'm not switching teams. I'm Reformed, for better
Right.
or worse. As cringe as some of the reformers sometimes get. Modern reformers. I'm Reformed because I believe it's true, and I love the Reformed tradition. It is my home. It's my heritage. It's my tradition. So I'm not saying switch teams, but I am saying that if you just want, every year to host and then rehost and re-rehost, the Tulip Conference, or the Solas Conference, or like, you're in GMI. You're not going to make it. That's just, it matters. And I'm teaching at the local level as a pastor. I am teaching, the doctrines of grace. Those things they do need to be taught and retaught. But right now, like, the church that I pastor is, it was entirely Reformed when I was in San Diego. But because that was the thing. But now the common denominator it's not Reformed theology. It's not even eschatology. People think it is. A lot of the Reformed guys are like, these young whippersnappers have elevated, eschatology above soteriology, and post mill has become more important than the solos. And it's like, no, it's really not that either. I have a ton of people who aren't post mill in the church. The one common denominator is that everybody there realizes that we're currently in Trashworld, and that Christ is the only one who can get us out of it. And so we had a ton of people come that were pre-mill, and some of them become post-mill, but a lot of them still are pre-mill. But they came because every other church was stopped singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, and required mass, and that's only after 9 months of being shut down. So it's that the game. My point is, the whole playing field, the whole map has changed. So
Yeah.
like it's like you're over here playing checkers, and but all the pieces were just replaced in 2020, and now it's chess, and you're still trying to play checkers with chess
Yeah.
pieces. And it's like, guys, and again, I'm not saying abandon the doctrines of grace. The Reformed tradition, I think it's right, it's good, but if that's all you want to do all day is just the uber duper Calvinist club, then I just don't think you're going to make it.
That's right. Adventures in missing the point, right?
Yes.
We have to. Jesus was pretty particular. He chastised the Pharisees for not understanding the signs, the times in which we live, and we live in a time when we need a bunch of people across the spectrum of various doctrinal stances to pick up arms and point them at Trashworld together. So,
amen.
Praise God. I'm glad that's what you're doing, Joel. I hopefully will see you sometime soon, whether it's at the Right Response Conference or somewhere else. But always enjoy chatting with you, and thanks again for coming on.
Thanks, Nate. Thanks, Chris.
And for all of our listeners, make sure that you follow Joel. You can look up Joel Webbon or Right Response Ministries just about anywhere, and follow him there. And until next time, see you later.